Good afternoon, good evening, everyone from US, Asia, wherever you are. Welcome to Billion Dollar Moves.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be back here.
Yeah. 19% was the number, right, of Americans living in poverty. And now, more than 50 years later, 2 million nonprofits later, where the sole purpose is tied to breaking the cycle of poverty, the gap has actually widened. And it points to the fact that, we are, doing no harm is not good enough. Right. And, especially now, and it will be remiss for me not to even mention the moment that we're in with the rise of hatred against Asian Americans and just the rise of racial reckoning, that the perfect storm of everything right now. And investors are sort of sitting there, doing sometimes I think, it looks like more of the same. And my question is to you with this as a backdrop, right, of poverty being one of the goals that you work on. And of course, there are many other goals that we're talking about here, the 17 SDGs. Where has investing and impact investing gone wrong here, and where are we going?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I talked on that podcast. I call kind of a triple threat, right? You and I talked about this, and it's really, if we think about what we all need to kind of succeed, live healthy, productive lives, it centers around education, workforce, and healthcare. Right. And we're at a moment in time where we're deciding what of those things are necessities and should be borne by all, and what of those things are personal choices borne by you. Right. And where we have inequities, and especially in the education space, and then also in workforce, is really around, and this is where I think impact investing has gone wrong. And this is where impact washing is kind of coming in. We have about 500 billion right now that is been allocated to what I would call impact investment funds. Those look to be private offerings, right? So when I say that, I want to separate from the kind of public markets and the theme around environmental, social, and governance, and what we call in the practice ESG. And so we'll separate those out for a minute. And where the great influence, where impact investment hasn't gotten the traction that it should have, or should have by now, is largely who are the stakeholders at the table, right? So a lot of those funds originate with what looks like the same legacy private equity and or hedge or venture capital funds. I would challenge anyone, and I think there's plenty of statistics, that's about a 9, like if you took an average ownership group of an impact fund, you might see 8 men, 2 women, right, that are part of that. And then the odds look even worse if you're a person of color having a stake in an impact fund. So there isn't this relatable body governing that capital. There's big, great ideas, but there isn't the relatable person at the table that can lend the voice of what's happening in the community. What are you trying to solve? And do you have the person who's had that lived experience in the room helping to challenge why something may or may not work? Right. And so you end up having, some that survive, and we're getting and then some shut down and close and don't get the traction. Some of the issue too. And so if you just take lack of diversity, no different than in the corporate world, and especially in my space in finance, lacks huge diversity in the upper ranks, right? And that's not lost on anybody here, I would suspect, listening to the call. But if you take lack of diversity and you take the past 20 years where in some of the impact funds, you don't have, I would say, policy supports. So in investment land, a lot of times up until I would say the recent 5 years, you really had silos of who was going to oversee the capital and how that got influenced. And so, an impact investment entrepreneur wouldn't so much be out talking about, okay, what are the policy supports and what are those levers? And I can't actually succeed or scale without certain policy supports, and whether those are federal supports or local municipal supports. And I don't mean tax subsidies in this way. What I mean really is legislation and governing bodies not getting in the way of improving something that we believe is a complete violation of how we should be living as people, or how the planet should be continuing to breathe.